Hello and welcome. My name is Julian Sharp and I'm going to be taking you through my options and methods for customizing Microsoft Dataverse, or CDS. In this session we're going to be looking at the different ways and comparing the different ways we can achieve the same customizations with different methods. We'll be looking at the pros and cons of each of those options. So we're comparing things like classic workflows with Power Automate flows, plugins, JavaScript, business rules. We're looking at embedded Canvas apps, as well as I'll be giving you some tips and tricks on how to avoid the need for code, or to make your solutions a lot easier to create richer experiences for your customers. This is a session for both developers and non-developers, so hopefully both groups will get something out of it. And as I'm going through, I'll compare code versus low-code options. So first, a little bit about myself. My name is Julian Sharp and I've been involved in Dynamics since it first came out. I've implemented hundreds of solutions around Dynamics, Azure and the Power Platform. I like using all these products together to create great solutions for my users. So that's enough about me. Let's get back into the topics. The objective of this session is to show you the different ways you achieve the same customizations. Hopefully by going through this you'll find ways of doing things you never thought of before that can really save you a significant amount of time when you're building solutions for your users. The agenda, we're going to be building this around an example requirement I've got. So I've built a little mini solution and we're going to see how much we can do with that using some of the capabilities within the Microsoft Dataverse and model-driven apps. So I'll explain the requirement to begin with. Then we'll look at the business logic, options around changing logic and handling logic. I'm going to spend a bit of time looking at the user interface issues, and then look around processes, particularly how we can automate. I'll then look at analytics options, and I'll finish off with my tips and tricks that I use extensively when I'm building solutions. So let's look at the requirement to begin with. So this requirement is around a very simple requirement, just to cover managing building security, to handle guarding of buildings, tracking visitors, handling inspections. So we've got a number of tables, I almost said entities, oops, and we're going to be looking at how we can track visitors in and out, and how we can also then analyze data, get some useful insights into our data. So I've built a little data model, custom tables. Here's my data model. My core entity is actually the visit entity, because that's what we're going to be tracking. So people come in to visit, we need to check them into one of the buildings, manage the people they're speaking to, which room they're in, and this is buildings across multiple countries. We've also got to do planned maintenance and other inspections. We might have people coming in for multiple different reasons. I'm briefly going to show you this app. It's a simple model-driven app with a few fields laid out in it. I've built a very simple little dashboard to show a standard dashboard and fields, a couple of charts. And I'm going to show you how we can improve this with a few choice customizations. The core entity I say is visit. In here you see my record. You might recognize some of the names. Hi Chris. Very, very basic layout. So what we've got is, in terms of capturing the data, we've got the person coming, which is me, the building I'm going to see, the room I need to go into, the purpose of my visit, the status of my visit is currently planned, and when I'm due to arrive and when I'm due to leave. So that's the information we've got here. Fairly sparse information, not much in it right now. If I look around some of the other entities, we've not got much data in there, but I've got a few bits of information that we can use. How can we improve it? Well, first of all, when we're looking to improve a solution, I always think we should always keep in mind code versus low code. We should be fully aware that we should leverage or use any solution we can over code first solutions, if at all possible. And we're seeing things such as Power Automate Flow. I love Power Automate. I could probably spend all day just talking about Power Automate, how much capability it has, and how I can talk about over the last few years how often I've not gone to code. Power Automate has been my saviour for sorting things out. And it has much greater range of functionality in the workflows and plugins. We'll look at that later. And also, business rules can be used in place of JavaScript, and we'll compare and have a look at those. So those are just a couple of examples. I'm going to show you a load more. Let's look at logic first. So this is how can I replace logic without doing code, or what are my options for performing some sort of business logic in my application and data. And when we're looking at logic, I'm talking about these are the sort of tools we have available to us within the platform. I can use JavaScript within forms. So JavaScript can interact with the user in a model-driven app form. We can do validation, we can set values, do calculations, we can manipulate the form at runtime. Business rules can do similar things. There's some things you can do in JavaScript that you can't do in rules, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And there's some things you can do in rules that you can't do in JavaScript. But also remember, we've got calculated columns and roll-up columns. I use these extensively to reduce the need for code. I do calculations. So we'll look at both calculated and roll-up columns in this section. So business rules versus JavaScript first. So JavaScript, you require a developer. It can be from very simple to very, very complex. And with JavaScript, you can do quite a lot of manipulation of the form, and it also can call the web API, so you can create records, update records, you can retrieve, do queries, get related data from another. Imagine yourself when you're on a form, you can go off to other records, because typically when you're in a form you can only access the fields on the form, but JavaScript has the ability with the web API to go get related data, go perform creation and update of records. Okay, so JavaScript, I've done a lot of JavaScript in my time. It is supported and there is a proper model for it, but there is a danger that you could go do something that could cause you problems. Business rules, however, are for simple operations. They can do two types of operation. There's the operation within the form itself, and I'm talking about model-driven app forms here. So within a form, we can show and hide fields. We can set a value. But we've only got simple field-based operations, where JavaScript can actually operate on not just fields, but on whole sections and whole tabs. So you've got a lot more capability with JavaScript in terms of manipulation. In terms of business rules, we can do things. We can do calculations. We can set values. So we can do those calculations. But it can get really hard if you have to go. It gets very tiresome. Once you have to, I want to set 5 fields. I want to hide 5 fields. In business rules, that's a lot of clicking and pointing. In JavaScript, it's actually just copy and paste and change it. My business rules have one other advantage for me. The business rules can fire in the form, which in a model-driven app form. They can also work at the data layer. They can work on Microsoft Dataverse. So essentially they work at the table layer. So when a record's created or updated. And that's incredibly powerful, because that allows us to build logic, such as validation of the data, that applies however that record is created and updated, whether that's come through an interface or a user entering it, or even a Canvas app, or even the Microsoft portal, the Power Apps portals. That logic will apply to every single transaction. Whereas JavaScript won't do that. It'll only work within a model-driven app form. So business rules have some really great things. One of my favourite features about business rules is the throw error message. And this is just one to compare between business rules and JavaScript. Because JavaScript, I can do validation and effectively stop the save. So both business rules and JavaScript have the ability to validate and stop the record from being saved. The trouble is, how does that appear to the user? To the user, in a business rule, we can actually craft a very nice message and display it next to the field on the form. In JavaScript, we're going to be dependent a little bit on what actually gets shown. And my experience is you throw the error message and you get a pop-up dialog, and the user just sees the word error. And it doesn't necessarily react in the right way. They see the word error, whereas what we're really saying is your data is invalid, or you need to compare two values properly. Your data event is right. Like for instance, we're going to look at later, how can I make sure the end date is after the start date? that sort of thing. In JavaScript, you'd throw an error message, which may not be nice, but business rule can throw a message that is much more valid to a user, much more relevant, and they don't necessarily go, I've got an error, call the help desk. In addition, as I said, that validation to start date versus end date I can do for every record, no matter how it's applied, whether it's through the form or through an API call or somebody even importing data. But business rules, one of the real problems with business rules, they can't go outside the form or outside the record they're in. They can't really access other bits of data. They can only access fields and manipulate fields on that particular form or record. There is a point where your business rules become so complex, it's going to be easier to go to JavaScript. And this is very much a message I'm going to talk all the way through. I have another really big rule. I do not mix business rules and JavaScript on the same form. They don't play well together. You can get some unexpected interactions or non-interactions if you have business rules. So essentially the business rule will not trigger some JavaScript. That's the main one. And you don't understand the order they run in. So I've talked enough about them. Let's do a little demo on business rules. Here I've got my solution. And what I want to do, I've got my solution here I've already created. What I want to do is I'm going to do that validation where the start date and end date have got to be in the right order. So I've got start date and end date. And what I'm going to do is going to create a business rule just to show you how that might work. So I'm in the business rule editor, and the business rule always starts with a condition. So what we're going to do in our condition is check for the dates, date check, and I'm going to check that both the start date and end date have been entered and that they both contain data. Let's add one rule here, another rule for the end date. And then I'm going to compare the two dates once we know that both of them are in there. So add another rule. So say if the end date is less than the start, another field, start date. So if all those things are true, I'm then going to add in a show error message step action. There we go. So we're going to show the error. And what I like about business rules rather, is I can display where this message is shown. I can display it next to the field. So it's going to be the end date. It's going to be the one that's wrong. And put the message here that I type is going to be the message that the user will see on the screen. This is much better than the JavaScript error. A JavaScript will throw an error which you cannot put in the form in the same place. Additionally, this message is also the one that's shown if this business rule is triggered by an API call or somebody creating something with Power Automate. The message you put here will be returned back to the calling program. So if I was writing code that would update the visit and it set the date incorrectly, my code will receive an exception with the message I'm seeing here. I'm putting that on. So a very simple message. And you see here the scope is showing this entity, which is the default now, which means it's going to run both with my model-driven app forms and also when I save the record in any way. So I've just got to activate it now and it'll be ready for use. So I'm going to create a new record in my model-driven app. So you can see this running. So I'm going to pick today. Let's pick today's date. I'm going to pick a time or date before. So I'll pick an earlier time. So I'll make it a bit earlier. It's 5 o'clock in the morning. We'll then see that error message. See how it appears in the screen next to the field. And these are really easy to create. I create lots of little business rules like that. And it'd be quite common that I would actually end up with more than one business rule to solve my problems. I'll need to create another rule for the actual start and actual end date to make sure they're in the right order. Right. Next, Rollup and calculator columns. You need to understand how these work and you need to understand when to go to code and when not to go to code. So what are they to begin with? Well, let's look at Rollup first. Rollup fields are aggregations along one-to-many relationships. And they're really great because you can use these for counting number of records or summing a value to get a whole amount. And I've used this extensively. One of my systems, we've got loads of Rollup fields. The only thing is, they're not updated immediately. They are not updated or recalculated every time you save. What happens is they're updated every hour. There's a system job that runs, and you can't decrease that time, how often it runs. So you can't rely on Rollup fields showing you the correct data. They're great for things like reporting or showing things. One of my projects, we show what we've done is we've pulled together all the costs and everything else for a particular project. And essentially on the project, we've got a whole load of summary data, which are all done through Rollup columns across, because we're probably rolling up across 6 or 7 different entities at multiple levels. We've actually got rollups on top of rollups. But it's great because you can now just see a great single picture of the project. You don't need that as a up-to-minute date. It doesn't have to be real time. So it works for that. But if you do need real-time updates, then you really should be looking at plugins, or if you need real-time, Power Automate can do the same thing. There's also another little gotcha which has hit me. You are limited to 10 Rollup columns per entity. It sounds like a lot, but I've got one which has 12. So it was like a typical project where, okay, more things got added. Suddenly we needed an 11th field. And at that point I had to go to code. I went to a plugin code that goes and triggers. Actually, it's a mixture of workflow and plugin code that fires that and does it and recalculates it. It's a bit of a shame, but so I've got a mixture of Rollup fields and plugin code. So alternatives, plugin, but if you're not going to do code, you can do the same thing in Power Automate. If I was doing that one now, I'd probably do all of these in Power Automate, because Power Automate can go and do the query, because when it can do the aggregations, query all the child records, sum them up, loop through, sum them up, and update the parent record, which is essentially what Rollup does. In terms of the aggregations, one thing I quite like about Rollups is you can filter, so only filter certain records. So filter, an example is I want to count the total number of open opportunities, or total number of open tasks on an opportunity, which I can do with the Rollup, because like I say, I can filter by the activity status. The only problem with Rollups when you do that is when it went down to 0, I wanted something to happen. Basically I was trying to do a situation where when somebody completes a series of tasks, it automatically moved to the next person, and that generated less of tasks, and when they completed tasks, it moved on. So it's like an automated business process. The problem is you cannot fire anything automatically, code or Power Automate or a plugin, when the count goes down to 0. So Rollups fields, or columns as they are now, cannot trigger anything. There's no event generator when they go to a certain value or when they change. They're also not audited. So if you need to do that thing where we wanted to trigger when it went down to 0, we first tried to do it Rollup fields. We had to abandon that approach and go to code. So just another example where I love Rollups. They're really, really useful, but they do have that limitation about triggering something when they either get to a certain value or drop down to a certain value, or something else happens. Calculated columns. Calculated columns I love. They do calculations on fields or values in my record, but they can also go and look at when you're doing the calculation, they go refer to all fields in end-to-one relationships, and this is incredibly useful. Unlike business rules, which don't have the end-to-one, I got a bit confused earlier on, because it's really important you understand the pros and cons, because I can do calculations in a business rule. I can do a business rule that can calculate a value. But what it can't do is go to another entity to find a value to multiply by. And a really good example of this, I wanted to have like a standard discount on opportunities. And we want that that percentage discount was on the account. So I wanted to apply a discount, just create a calculation on my opportunity for like a discount to be given, a 10% discount, say, or 15. Now I couldn't do that with the business rule, because the business rule could not identify or access that field on that value on the account table. But a calculated column can. So it can do that calculation very, very simply. And it's something you just have to understand. It's a dot notation. I'm actually going to show you this in a minute. So there are alternatives to business rules in that respect, and JavaScript, because JavaScript do calculations. One thing though is they're only updated when the record is saved. Unlike a business rule, which will update when you tab out the field or when you change a field value. So business rules are very similar to JavaScript in the way they're calculated. The moment the user types something in, that calculation will happen. A calculated column will only get recalculated when you retrieve a record or save a record. It's actually calculated on the retrieve. So if the user needs immediate response, like when somebody types something, like they want to maybe do a calculation on screen, they need to see it the moment they type, not have to wait for save, then you can't really use a calculated column. Okay. It's the same way that plugins and real-time workflow and Power Automate, they only trigger when a record is saved. So the save is what triggers calculated columns, workflow, plugins, and automate. If you need something sooner than that, JavaScript or business rules. Other things that are an issue with calculated columns. Main one is, just like Rollup fields, they can't fire something else. They can't trigger a real-time workflow to run, or a plugin to run, or a Power Automate flow to run. So essentially we can't generate when say when a calculated column exceeds a certain value or changes value even, we can't trigger something else to run and check it. I'll give you an example. I did a system for our own ISO 27001 system. And one of the things you do in ISO is you generate the risk score. So you typically multiply likelihood by impact and you get a score. And then you sum up those scores and then you get, like, I think we had asking it was between 0 and 25. And then what I want to show is I want to show 0 to 10 was low, 11 to 20 was medium, or 11 to 15 was medium, 16 to 25 was high. So I thought I'd just do a calculated column like that, which I could do. So it's on the score, because the score was a calculated field. Actually, the score was a roll-up field, actually rolling up from multiple scores. So the score was a roll-up field, and I could then do a calculated field on that roll-up field, which is great. But then what I wanted to do is I wanted to trigger a workflow when or trigger a plugin code when effectively the score turn this risk from medium to high. So any new high risk I need to be notified of automatically, and you just can't do that. So again, I had to abandon the calculator columns and go to code. Now I'd probably do Power Automate, because I can do those all in one statement, all the summing up and the evaluation in one. But it's one of the downsides. But I do love calculator columns. Let's have a little demo. So what I'm going to do is show you how easy it is to create a roll-up and calculated field. So let's do a simple roll-up first. So I'm going to go to my system. Here's my tables. Let's go to my visit. So I'm going to go and have a look at my building table. And what I'm going to do is do a roll-up field on here. So I'm going to add column. And what I'm going to do is just count the number of visits. So it's just a simple number of visits. Just total them up. I can't type either today. And everybody from Microsoft listening, this should always be lowercase. Now in terms of roll-up fields, we can roll up numbers typically, but we can also roll up dates. So I'm just going to roll up whole number. We're just going to do a count. And what I do is click on here. See calculate a roll-up. I click on add. I'm going to add a roll-up. And it's going to tell me to save. It's really annoying. So head to save, and then I have to go in and edit it again. It's going to pop up a little window to do the calculation. Now, just a warning, if you don't see that pop-up window, that's likely because you've got a pop-up blocker on your browser. So we get the little editor here. It's a fairly simple editor. So I've got my source entity. Now I'm going to show you my related entities. So it showed me all the one-to-many relationships. So I'm going to look here, visits. So the number of visits. Click on that. Here's where I can add filters. So this I think without filters, roll-up fields would be pretty useless, because I only want to roll up some of them. So I'm going to say, okay, let's do this. I'm just going to do a simple thing. I'm just going to look at, say, status equals active, all the active visits. And then I do an aggregation. I can sum fields, but I haven't got any fields. I can sum because you can only sum numeric fields. I'm just going to do a count of those. So I've added a number of visits. Save and close. And that's going to do that rollup field. And initially, it's going to take it a little while to generate that. I'm just going to do another. So how many visits are planned or planned? Let's do planned visits. Number of planned, because I've got a status. I've got an option set. So I do the whole number again. A roll up. Just want to show you the filtering. Now in the past I've done this, and it just makes life really nice and easy. We can use these in views. So we are restricted from using them in other areas, but it's quite nice. Actually, I've got this wrong. Calculate, yeah. Planned visits, related. I need to make this bigger because it's showing you that. Filter active. And I add more conditions. There we are. Visit status equals plan. So if it's planned. Okay, so equals. Just going to pick those up, and again, just do my same aggregation. I'm just going to do account, and I'm going to put those in. So it's quite nice and easy to use. Okay, quite nice and easy to build. And I'm just going to add them onto the form so you can see them when we go in. So I'm just going to add them into my form so we'll be able to see those values. They'll be read-only. But if I was to do code, I'd have to create the fields anyway and then just put that in. So let's just go hit save. I will just publish that. All we've done. I've got two browsers over. Just switch to the other browser. Just go into one of my buildings. Let's go to this Power Automate building. We should hopefully see that. So right now it hasn't calculated them. There's an initial delay of up to 12 hours for calculation, but you can just click on the calculate icon and tell it to recalculate. So I've got 8 visits, 5 of which are planned. And it also shows you the last date and time there. But the read-only fields, I can't show them. At least you can see when they were last updated. So a user can see how up to date and they can trigger it themselves. Right, let's have a look at calculated columns now. So what sort of calculation might I want to do? I'm actually going to do a calculation on the visit entity. This because it's got a one-to-one relationship. So I'm going to go to create a new column. So I'm going to calculate length of visit. So I'm going to gain hover as a whole number. And I'm going to add a calculation. Instead of adding a roll-up, add a calculation. You'll see it's very similar UI when it pops up. So here we are, we have a condition, it's optional. So I'm going to say if there is I'm basically going to compare the start and end date. So I need to make sure the start and end date contains data. I've got a whole lot of operators here, so I've got a lot of data operators. So the start date contains data and the end date contains data. What I'm going to do is calculation now. We have a whole series of formula that we can use. We've got a whole load of date time functions and text functions. So I've also got access to all the fields. So all I'm going to do is one of these. I've got learn, add the remove dates. I'm going to use the diff in dates. So diff in days. And actually you can just start typing and it has IntelliSense. So diff in days, pick it. And then it wants to start date and end date. And all I'm going to do is just start typing. Start date, and I can just, you see that it's showing the name of the field, so I'm going to pick start date, comma, end date. Okay, and because if the start and end date are the same, if it's start and end date are the same, it's going to be 0, so I'm just going to add 1 to it. Nice simple little calculation. Let me just show you another calculated field where I'm going to set a particular value. So I'm going to show you I'm going to do a little option set just for the sake of it, and I'm going to make this a choice or option set, and I'm just going to create a new choice. I'm just going to have a local one. I don't normally do local ones, but for the purpose of this it's going to make it nice and quick. And here I'm going to make it a calculation. So we've got a value here, but we're going to set it based on some sort of logic, some sort of if statement. So when I come over here, I'm going to say if. So add the condition. Now notice I've got all the end-to-one relationships, so I can actually have a look at the building. So I'm going to say if the building, and I haven't got many fields on thing, but I can look at the planned visits. I've actually got access to the roll-up fields. So I'm going to say if the number of visits or the number of outstanding visits or number of planned visits, say is greater than 5, then what I'm going to do is I can set the value. So I'm going to set the field to be my important to either, it's going to have to be non-priority. If there are more than 5 already planned, it's got to be non-priority. Or I can do an else. And I can actually do else if, but I'm just going to just set it like this, the value to not priority. So I'm basically looking at a Rollup field to do the calculation if they're priority or non-priority. So calculation isn't just calculating numbers or dates. It can be setting Boolean fields or any field type. You can set the value and do a calculation. And some of them related to do formulas on. There are some things that I'm going to talk about later within calculated fields and show you how you get around. One of my tips is for how to compare dates in calculated fields. We're looking at that. So I now go to my form. Stick it there. Well, probably should stick it up in the header. So it's a read-only field, just like a Rollup field. Oh, I meant to put the number of days in. I forgot to add that in. Where's the length of visit in days? Needs to go in there. You'll see that they've got the lock symbol on, so they're read-only. It shows you that they're read-only. Okay, let's go create a new visit. And I'll just show what happens. So I'm going to put in today's date, put in tomorrow, a few days later. Notice it doesn't do that calculation straight away. It's waited. It's going to wait till I create the record. Pick contact. I'm going to pick myself. Building. I need to pick the Power Automate building because I know that's going to trigger my important. So that's going to see my important. You see my important automatically set because I've got priority. So that's validation and logic we've built into the system that we can just apply. Let's look at the user interface improvements that we can do now. So there's quite a lot I can do. I'm not really going to talk a lot about how to customize forms, or I'm just going to talk about things we can do to help us. So I'll look at a couple of things, a couple of choices we have to make which can affect the user interface. So we're going to really be focusing on lookups, views as either quick views or subgrids, and I've got that twice, and also embedded canvas apps here. So first of all, there's a number of different form types. Main form you've seen. One of my favorite forms is actually the quick view form. The quick view form allows you to show information from a related entity in an end-to-one relationship. Now, right now they're read-only, but as of the latest release, we're going to be able to edit them. There's a new control code which allows to edit records, which is just huge, I think. But I do like the ability to increase the user interface. So let me show you what I mean by quick view forms and how that's works. So I'm going to quickly go into a demo of them, ways we can improve the user interface. So let's have a look at quick view forms to begin with. And what we see here in this form, I've got a gap over here. I'm in the visit, but if I want to see anything else about the building, I can't really see it. I'd have to navigate away. And the whole purpose of quick view forms is to prevent the user navigating away. Quick view. So I want it on my visit, but what do I want to show for building? So I'm actually going to edit the quick view for building. That's the one in the end-to-one relationship from visit. So here's the quick view form, and by default there's one there that's created for you. It doesn't have much in it. Typically you just have name and owner. So what I'm going to do, first of all, you can't remove these if they're required, so I'm just going to hide it. Hide the owner field. And then I'm going to put some key fields in. Let's put the country in. And I know I've got those 2 Rollup fields I can just use. The number of visits, number of planned visits. I can also insert another section. So what I'm going to do in here is show all the other visits. So I'm actually going to show the other visits in the building. So when I'm in looking at a visit, I can see what else is visiting, who else is visiting that building. Because I can add in a subgrid. Subgrids are your friend. Subgrids are showing information in one-to-many relationships. So I always say check show related records. I think that should be checked by default, and I should here be able to see my visits. And then I'm going to see all the visits. I've got some views here. I can just pick which view I want. Let's pick today's visits that are due. So these are other due visits today. So if somebody's booking in something, we see that. I'm creating this quick view form. And the great thing about the quick view form is it allows me to show related records. So I can look up one relationship. So if I'm starting with my visit, I can look up to building. Then I can look over to a different entity on another one-to-many relationship. I use this extensively so that when I go in here, it's not just visits I'm going to put in. I'm going to add another one in. I'm going to add inspections because I'm going to see I want to know what else is going on in this building. So I can add yet another subgrid. Okay, let's add that subgrid in. We see this one. related records, we'll see inspections. So I'll use the inspections view. There we go. See that's in there. So I'm building up something that gives me a user a lot of abilities to really see everything without having to navigating away from where they want. It's all about the user experience. I'm now going to add that form onto the visit form. So remember, it's always on an end-to-one relationship. On my visit form, I'll just go over here. They're really easy to add in. I've got a section over here ready to hold it, and I'm just going to pick my controls. One of the options is quick view, and I just drag it over. And say what one I want, which quick view. Because I can actually have more than one quick view. So there it's in. It's going to put it in there. I now switch to my record, and we'll see in here. So I've got my building, and I've got my quick view. So I see all the other visits today for that place. I see who else is coming. So I see I'm due for 2 meetings. Eric and Mark and Marco and it's all coming in today to this building. We see all that. So that improves the user experience significantly. Other things. One of your biggest choices is, do I use a lookup field or a choice field? Now we've got an entity called country. Now one of my options for country is to create a choice list. We go to columns, and I could just, if I want, create a column. I could create a country choice. I'll call it country choice to make sure it's obvious. I can choose a choice field, and I enter my values. So I create a new choice, which is going to be my country. So I'm going to have to put in all the different countries. So I'd have to type in manually who makes these choices. So if you want to add to this list, users can't do it. You've got to go and get a developer to. So you then got to release it through your life cycle. So I much prefer, instead of having options, even for things like country lists, I actually prefer to create entities. So I've got a table I've created on my, here I've got a table called country. So I've got choice or a table. There are pros and cons of each approach. So here's my country table. Now if I use, what's the user experience like between them? And there's pros and cons. So I'm just going to put them side by side so you get to see it. So if I'm going to I'll create a new building in my system. Buildings, if I go to create a new building, let's do what we're missing, Power Virtual Agents, right? So I've got a country lookup. So this is what I had before. It's just a lookup to another entity. It's an end-to-one relationship. I can go and pick the relevant fields. I'm going to pick, say, it's Norway today, or I've got a drop down. Now the issue really comes down to 2 things. First of which, what's the user experience like? I only like choices if their number of options is limited. If you have 100 items in that list, it's not going to be very usable. Additionally, if the items change a lot, you're going to end up, how do I remove a value? I can't hide them. I can't delete them without breaking data. So often having an entity or a table and end-to-one relationship can be better. The downsides come if you've got multiple languages in your system. Because if I have multiple languages, I can actually put the translations for each language here. But there are some things I've done. If you have a look here, I often do this. Go and I'll have extra fields. And the great thing about that is I can make it search on any of these fields. So if I was to go use this field, let me just go show what I mean. If I go create another building, I can just type NO. But it's actually going to search on any of the fields. I can say what fields to search on. So if somebody does type it in their local language or different language, we can find it. But this is one of those choices. It also makes life easier having an end-to-one relationship with a table for things like analytics, because it becomes another bit of data. Choices can be a little bit painful to use in things like Power BI, getting the label values and getting it to automatically create a data model for you that you can leverage in your Power BI. So I actually prefer using entities in my system. And the other thing you can do is you can filter them. You can actually put in some logic in the to say filter this value based on another value. So if I've got multiple lookups, and I'll give you another really good example of that. I'm going to go to visits. So I'm going to create a new visit. Now at the moment I can look at the building, pick on Power Automate, and then I can pick up a room. Now at the moment it allows me to pick any room. Okay, I've got access to all the rooms. But if I look at all the rooms, they're in different, each room is in a different building. So I need to filter that. I want to make sure when I pick things that I don't get an inconsistent set of data. And that's what fields and lookups do. Now, you may have heard of people talk about dependent pick lists. You can do it in one pick list and another pick list. So say I have my building and rooms in its choice fields. I could do one, but I have to write JavaScript to do that. So one advantage of having a series of related entities, you could actually apply that and use that inside my forms. So I'm just going to go and do that on my visit form. And I'm just going to access the same thing, the properties of that field. You'll see enable this filter lookup. So show records where the build, it actually gives me the option. So where the building contains the rooms. And you also give the option, can the user turn off the filter? I don't want them doing that. So this shows me the one-to-many relationship between visits and rooms. So quite simple to do. It's just a few clicking points to get it set up. And now when I go in and go in and create a new visit, so I pick a building, I'll only get the rooms for Power BI. I only get the subset of rooms for Power BI. I don't get the other ones. So that's a really quick way of doing things. Now you can go a bit further. If you've got JavaScript underneath, you can actually make it a little bit smarter than that. You can actually apply your own filtering. One of my favorite things is subgrids. So let's look how we use those. So if I go back to my system, I've already added some in. So if I go back to my building, and what we've got here is I've got a number of tabs. So what I've done is here's the list of rooms for that building. So when you add a grid, it just automatically shows the records that are in that relationship. So I've got here, nice and easy to see what visits. So I can see what visits are for this building, for the Power Automate building. What inspections we've got? No inspections. I know you've got access to, you've also got all your access to your one-to-many and many-to-many relationships off related, but for me it's much nicer for a user to be able to go in here and see the information that they need. And you saw me using that on my visits. So if I go back to my visit that I had, this here I'm also using the subgrid inside a quick view. So I'm just using the idea of subgrids, which are just views to filter data. That's all they are, a filter, but it shows you within the interface. And you can go into editable grids to make it nicer if you want to use those. Dashboards. Really, there's one thing I really want to focus on dashboards. Let's have a look at the dashboard I've created. Here's our standard modular app dashboard with views and charts. Very basic, very static. They're good. They're good for what they need. They're good in the right circumstances. Don't get me wrong, I quite like them. But for me, if I was managing something, I really want to look at interactive dashboards. If you've not seen interactive dashboards and understand how they can really improve the user experience, pay attention now. So what I've done here, I've done a dashboard, not one up, based on the visit. And see, this is a multi-stream dashboard, but I've just done it on visits. So it showed me the data for this course. I can filter it down just today if I want. And what I like about here is I've got a couple of visual filters. I can put in a little chart like that. So I've created a couple of little charts. I use the donut chart. And what it does here, you see visits by purpose. So I've got on my visit, I've got a purpose and status. And I can very quickly focus on here. So I can focus on the overdue ones, just clicking on it, and it filters me my overdue visits. Or I can say, let's filter by maintenance. What have we got? And you see everything else adjusts automatically. You'll also see there's some colours. You may not be aware that you can associate a colour with a choice, but when you do that in this view, in this dashboard, it shows the colours, the purpose and my status. If you actually have a look at here, you actually see I've got a colour barcode down the left hand side. So if I just go to maintenance, you'll see they'll all go to maintenance. And this makes it really useful for users to really get great information out. Now what this is the card form. It's the most unappreciated form in modular and apps. I've just added some few fields, so I can immediately see from here everything about it. So Chris is due today, I can see what he's doing, and I can actually, from within here, as a user, I can make changes, see other information, and do things. I can get into it, and it's a really good user interaction tool. Right, just want to talk about Canvas apps now. Embedded Canvas apps for me are some of the greatest things to have come to the Power Platform. It's very hard in a model-driven app to do logic, or logic that has to go across multiple different things and then do different things. In the past, I've written web resources with lots of JavaScript, and I feel like little mini wizards. I have done an awful lot of building Canvas apps and embedding those Canvas apps in applications just to make the user experience so much better. They're really quite straightforward to do. Now I'm not going to go build one now. I'm just going to go and enable one just to make it. And what I've done is fairly simple. You just have a field and you connect it up to a control. So here's my field I've got here. You haven't seen this ready. So what I'm going to do, if I have a look at this, have a look at the components, you see it's actually, I've linked it to a Canvas app. So I've actually built a Canvas app. So somebody actually arrives on site. As it is before I did that change, the security guard's got to go into this form. He's got to go select the date and time, manually select it. That's not a great experience. It's going to be error prone. So if I go into a visit, I'm going to go to my visit, and you'll now see I should have a couple of buttons. So I can check in and check out. This wasn't working earlier on. So here, God's button. All I have to do as a user now is click on check in, and I'm actually just doing a patch statement behind the scenes that's going to set the start date. So I'm a big fan of using Canvas apps to improve the user experience. I'm not going to build process here because it's not going to take too long. I just want to discuss them. So we have a number of different options for doing automation and doing calculation. I've already mentioned them, some of them already when I was talking about business rules and JavaScript. So we have classic workflows, we've got custom actions, we've got business process flows, Power Automate, plugins, and don't leave out duplicate detection. Let's have a look at one of the things I want to compare. Power Automate versus classic workflows. Because if you ever go to build a workflow, it says front and center, you should use a Power Automate instead. However, you just need to understand what they can and can't do. First thing is, up the top, Power Automate is asynchronous, which means it runs in the background. It can never be synchronous. It can't run as part of the transaction, which means it can't stop a save. Just like my business rule could stop a save with some validation, I can in classic workflow. I can have a synchronous workflow, or in Microsoft terminology, real-time workflow. I can actually stop the workflow with an error, and that essentially throws an exception. I can't do that with Power Automate Flow. All I can do is report that something has broken. Or the classic workflow, if you do a synchronous or real-time workflow, the user will see the message. In the stop workflow step, the text you put in there will be shown to the user. Classic workflow for me, you should use for anything you want to do synchronous. My view, if it's asynchronous or background, use Power Automate, because there's just so much more you can do. Power Automate can do queries on your one-to-many relationships. My classic workflow is I can only access records in an end-to-one relationship. I can't access one-to-one relationships, and I can only do one hop. I call it the one hop problem. You get this with calculator columns in classic workflow. They can go along an end-to-one relationship, but they can only go one step. They can't go from one entity to another entity to another entity. That's not, they don't have that capability. Let's compare Power Automate and plugins. Now, plugins are server-side code, or they're .NET assemblies. They're written in C# or VB, and they can run as part of your transaction. They're part of the Dataverse event model. Plugins can either be synchronous or asynchronous. So just like workflow. For me, a lot of the plugins that I used to write, the asynchronous ones, I've done in Power Automate. But if it needs to be synchronous, i.e. part of the transaction, like it's got to happen as part of that save, the user's got to see the result straight away, then I have to use a synchronous plugin. But I very rarely write an asynchronous plugin anymore. Again, plugins are only restricted to the Dataverse environment they're in. The biggest problem with me with plugins is they have a 2-minute limit. If they time out, that's it. You get an error. So you can't write long-running code, long things, whereas Power Automate doesn't have the same issue. Next topic is analytics. Really just a quick review of what we have. So we've already talked a little bit about them. We have our inbuilt charts and dashboards, our model-driven app or our Dataverse charts and dashboards that we can show in a model-driven app. And for me, they're very good for certain scenarios. They're very good for, say, a user to see their workload. So I can see how many records I've currently got, or a single view across all my different records in one view. That's what a dashboard does. So it's very good for sort of called like workload, current workload management, or daily workload management. What have I got to do today? Or maybe a manager maybe having a slightly view of what their team's workload is. What they're not very good at is anything around trends or anything sort of sophisticated or interactive, because they're pretty much static read only. The charts and dashboards inside the model-driven app. So really, we should be looking at Power BI. Power BI allows you to do so much more. I'm a real big fan of Power BI because Power BI also allows us to get data from multiple sources together and combine them. You can pull data from different systems to create a single view of a company. And what I like about Power BI is I can embed my Power BI dashboard now inside my model-driven app, or I can embed a tile inside a Canvas app. And Power BI is really nice and easy to use. I've already built a Power BI dashboard. Well, actually, I built a data model in Power BI. I'm just going to show you that now. I've done this already. Just a quick overview, and then I'm going to show you how we use it. Power BI Desktop is a tool you use to really create great Power BI reports and dashboards. So here you see the data model in Power BI Desktop, the tables we've seen and shown the relationships. So I built those. And then I went in, and I could do more on this to tidy up the transformation of the data, but I've just built a simple dashboard with a few visualizations. And what you do is you publish from Power BI Desktop up into the Power BI service. So here we see the Power BI report published up to the Power BI service. It's what most people think of Power BI. It's powerbi.com, where you go in and create and view your dashboards. And I built this dashboard just by populating for that report. Once I've got my Power BI dashboard, I can then go and build it into my app. Here you see now, if I drop down, I've actually gone and added in and created, I did a new dashboard, new Power BI dashboard, and added it in. And we see that same dashboard now within my model-driven app form. Go get the latest data. Right, let's finish off now with some tips and tricks that I think you'll find really, really useful. The first of which is I use extra relationships. Now, if you remember, I've got a multiple relationships from room and building to visit. There's actually, if you go back to the data model, you'll have seen that there was more than one pathway between two of the tables. And sometimes I create extra relationships, extra one-to-many relationships to get around my one-hop problem. It's quite typical that I will create like a hidden relationship from one entity to the other. It's like hop over. So I can get in my workflow, in my calculated columns, to get access to those fields. So that's one of my first tricks. Other uses, actions. Actions are incredibly useful in workflow and also in Power Automate. I use actions to be able to go, again, get past this end-to-one relation, this one-hot problem. Calculated and roll-up columns. This, again, is one of my favorite tricks. Remember I said about business rules that you cannot access fields outside the entity. So we have this problem where if I'm on, say, the visits, I can't access the country. It's not one of the fields that are on here. It's on the building. So I couldn't do a business rule that did something on country. It just wouldn't be possible. So I'll just show you. If I try and do a business rule, the only thing I've got access to in my condition in those fields, I haven't got country anywhere here. So I'll do this. A new column. I'm going to call it country. And it's going to be, I'm going to reuse that country choice that I did. And notice I'm just going to do it as a calculated field. So this is the secret to calculation. This is one of my favorite things. And we did this, I don't know what our customers called me up a while ago. They wanted something similar. They needed a field down. It was actually to populate a email template. They needed a bit of information on the email. If you do email templates and things like even Word templates, and Excel templates, you can only access certain fields. So what we did is we effectively created a calculated field which just pointed at its parent record. So what I'm going to do is here, add action. And I'm going to say so action is equal to value, so field. And I can look, I've got all the other end-to-one relationships. So I can go to, so it's building, country choice. So I'm pulling that down. Save and close. It's going to be read only. But if I go to business rule now, I'll be able to do something different based on country. So I'll be able to say, okay, if the country is now there, country is equal to Denmark, Norway or Sweden, I'll be able to do different things and branch it. This has saved me loads of time. In the past, before I realised you could do this, I was writing code to synchronise the data, copy it around and then keep it in sync, which was a lot of work. I've written lots of code in my time, which cascades values down my data model, so it's then available for other things, because I had this one-hot problem and this. So I use this calculated field, just pointing at a parent record to go get this. The other trick I have is I wanted to do some logic based on if it's overdue. I wanted to say if the visit is overdue. So I did a little view here. So I did total today's visits that are due or overdue visits, what I did. So I created a view, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a filter which said Okay, I'm doing it on stage. So I'm going to ignore the stage. So I've done it on that. I'm just going to delete that. I want to try this. Where I want to say where the is where the start date is on or after now. Is after today. So it's like do that because I don't want people who are. I only want this to show people who haven't arrived yet who are due. So I want one list of all the people who are due to arrive. So it's not the people who've arrived. So I need to exclude my people who've arrived. Bit status equals plan. So then they haven't arrived yet. But I need the start date after today, or actually I need start date up. So I can say today, but that's going to get the people who aren't due yet. So it's not necessarily what I need. I wanted to compare it to, or say it's greater than the current date and time. So I can't say it's greater than now, is older than, or whatever. I don't have that option. So on or after now. I can only pick a date, or on or before now. So yeah, on or before. I don't have that option. So one of the things I often do in my applications or solutions is this. I will create a calculated field. And you may see it. Where are you field? Today. I've called it today. This calculated field, let's have a look at this calculation. All it is, I haven't actually done it yet. Let's actually do this. So I'll say, we're going to say the action. So let's go like this. So I'm going to say, create a field which just says, and all it's going to do is use one of those functions. A function called now. Yeah, now. There's a function called now. Do that. And that's going to take the current date and time. That's all I do. So that's now set. I've now created a date and time field that I can now compare with in my view. That's another trick that I use to make use of that now field to filter records or use it in business rules. So those are just some hints and tips. I've probably got loads more, but we haven't got enough time. So thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please raise them now. And don't forget to fill out the surveys and win swag. We haven't had so much swag lately in the last year. So any's better than the other. There's a bit link, there's the QR code. So thank you for attending. Appreciate it. Goodbye.